So today we're going to look deeper into Furuta's character and how he's kind of been played upon throughout the entirety of Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re specifically. As of recently, regarding the most recent chapter, Ishida has started to wrap a little bit more relevancy to Furuta's morality, starting to give him more of a character, starting to breathe some life into him. Furuta has been a weird character throughout the entirety of Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. He's been a mysterious one, very similar to Uta and Roma, and the reason why I mention those two characters specifically is because they also play quite a vital role to the story, but they are also very mysterious, alongside of abundance of other characters that are quite equally important throughout this story. But regarding Ishida's most recent writing style, with kind of having a character that's been wrapped in mystery since the get-go to ultimately dumping a lot of information, a lot of context to their character right in their final stages of development. It's very weird to do. It sometimes comes off as extremely fickle, or even just something that he could have completely come up with on the spot, which I'll break down and kind of explain in more context in a second. The reason Furuta at the moment is seemingly a fickle character on one hand, but also a character that has to have this well-needed development, is because he is, at the end of the day, the prime villain of the story. He is technically the author for the bad stuff that happens in the story. He is the counterpart to Kaneki. He is the antagonist of the story. Now, what I mean by comparing Furuta to Uta and Roma is pretty simple, right? Uta recently had his kind of spotlight, his time to shine, which was obviously in the form of a fight between him and Renji-Yomo. Now, obviously, there's a lot of history between him and Renji-Yomo. There's a lot of context there. There is a backbone for Uta. It may be little, but we knew a little bit about it prior to this situation. What made Uta such an interesting character is because of the mystery that Ishida shrouded Uta in. When we had this fight go down, mind you, I'm not the biggest fan of the fight in general, but the context given to Uta's character and his, I guess, morality shift regarding the clowns in general, as well as Uta as a character specifically, it kind of made a lot of sense. Unfortunately, like I said, it comes off very fickle. Very weird choice to have a character that's wrapped in mystery to ultimately, when that character is needed to be played upon, to dump all this information that maybe he had the entire time. Why didn't he trickle it throughout the story? Why didn't he, dump little bits of important information throughout the entirety of the story? And I guess that's a choicey one. Do you want to have your character completely shrouded and off the radar, or do you want people to expect a lot more from him, but then ultimately not give enough when that time comes around? I feel like Uta is the prime example of something that could have been extremely great, but ultimately fell short. He was a character that had a lot of expectation behind him, and I don't know if that is because Ishida gave too much information about his character or too little. It's a very fine line between both. But when we did get the clarification for Uta, and then as well as his morality and how he felt about the world in general and why he was with the clowns and the whole agenda behind them, it added a lot more relatability to his character. It made him more grounded as a character. It just felt extremely lackluster and washed out by one, quite a poor fight, at least in my opinion, but two, because it was seemingly forced down our throat during that fight, and actually the reason why it concluded in the first place. I think the reception for that fight would have been handled a lot better if the fight was not forcefully shifted because of the information that Ishida was trying to put onto Uta and the backbone that he was trying to re-clarify to kind of end off Uta's character. If it was kind of more so just a soul fight at the beginning, maybe for a couple of more chapters, and then we kind of found out about Uta's history and his morality and how he kind of handles things, it might have been a completely different thing. It might have been better, hell, it might have been worse. Another situation that Ishida has used this is actually with Roma as well. She is also a character that hasn't really played much importance throughout the entirety of the story. At least that's not what it seems. She's not really a full running character when it comes to big bad villains, but she is part of the clowns, who are a very vital group to the story. It helps build the world, right? A lot of people came at me very weirdly when I said that the clowns are, the biggest group in the entirety of the story, and they're like, I don't see it. So how is this mysterious group, one of the biggest villains in the story? But realistically, they are. And it's kind of the reason why I'm so disappointed with the clowns, is because Ishida didn't play on them that well. I don't think Ishida lived up to the expectation of the clown. The group itself played a, backbone to either side. They weren't a specific driving force. I did come up with an idea that could have made them a specific driving force if they were continuing the quote-unquote legacy of the original One-Eyed King, which I feel like like would have been an extremely cool way to go about it. But with the conclusion of the clowns and them being basically out of the picture at this point, the backbone that they played to Furuta, to Kaneki, to the world itself, they played like a middleman. And that's kind of what made them so scary. You can never pin them down specifically on certain organizations or groups or motives or agendas because they were so in and out. They were a vicious force to be reckoned with because they were so jump shippy. They wanted to pick a side that they knew would win. They wanted to pick people that they could work with, people that they could trust, and had a lot of power behind them, and it made their group fickle in nature. But when it came to writing, it could have been a lot better. Roma was, a leading hand for this, a character that was completely shrouded in mystery until we ultimately got her fight with Yuri, and then once again we have this repetition, which obviously happened prior to Uta and Renjiome's fight, but it was the exact same thing that happened. Roma's fight and the backstory for her character, which was relatable, which made her more real to an extent, put a lot more emotion into her character, was ultimately washed out by the ridiculous fight that entailed to. It was a cool fight, don't get me wrong, but there was obviously the conception that, Roma was a much more powerful character that, Yuri managed to defeat, and people weren't happy with that, obviously. And people were very disappointed the fact that Roma, this triple S rated, supposedly went toe to toe with Demon Tsuneyoshi, this full Kagaja demon, if you will, that had a lot of experience, ultimately got washed out by Yuri, an up-and-coming investigator who, at the time, yes, has a lot of power. It's not a completely one-sided fight. There was some relevance there to Yuri being a phenomenal character, but it just felt completely overshadowed when you tried to put information and, clarification on Roma's character. The exact same thing happened with Uta, which leads me to Furuta, and I apologize for getting off course, but this is the clarification and context that you need to understand Furuta at the moment. Furuta is being depicted as a tragic character. Once again, Ishida has chosen the writing style of having Furuta be this mysterious character throughout the entirety of the story, to ultimately dumping all of this information on his character at the very last minute. Is it a good decision? I don't know yet. That has yet to be proven. There is still a couple of more chapters that could evidently beefen up his character more. Next week's chapter is supposedly a full dialogued flashback, which would be extremely nice to see. At this point, that is the only thing that I am praying for Furuta's character to not be specifically a fickle one, even though a lot of people may seem like it is fickle because of the information being forced down our throats. I do need this clarification. We do need this clarification. The chapter gave a small bit of insight for it, some relevancy, some emotion to Furuta's character, which is something that I actually heavily appreciate. And then ultimately goes back to the question is, why didn't Ishida plan it throughout the story? Why didn't he hint it? Why didn't he drop bits and pieces of information? And then that goes back to the, well, do you want a character to be completely mysterious and then ultimately have our expectations extremely high when it does happen, then ultimately not meet those requirements? Or do you want to kind of not have your character be super mysterious, and so when the big reveal does come down the line, it's very minimalistic, it's very lackluster because you've seen it coming? I think that's kind of the beauty of Furuta's character, and I feel like he could be specifically the only character that Ishida can dump and force a lot of information down our throats in the finale of this fight, even the finale of his character specifically, because it makes his character seem so worthwhile to that extent. With what we've seen from Furuta so far being, a tragic character, wanting a future that he ultimately cannot have, and then Ishida kind of dumping the information on us now, it makes it seem like Furuta's character has been completely ignored throughout the story. And not in terms of ignored as a character, but as in the fact that Furuta's future has been ignored. And so in that instance, Ishida has also ignored his future. I'm explaining this very poorly. I feel like the sense that the readers get from Furuta's character right now is that, wow, it's information that, Ishida should have played on through the story, or shouldn't be dumping on us all at once. And I kind of agree. But then I'm also looking at the other side of it and I'm like, maybe this is exactly what he wanted. Maybe this isn't as fickle as it could potentially be. Furuta's character being, shriveled up in tragic past and being cursed by his bloodline and his heritage, not being able to have a future that he specifically wanted, ultimately plagued to walk this earth, not wanting what he could have, being jealous of Kaneki and everyone else around him, the world around him, because evidently he will die soon because of his aging process. Maybe it's decent. Maybe it's not all too bad if Ishida forces it down his throat. Just like Furuta's emotions, just like Furuta's wants, they were completely skewered and irrelevant. And maybe that's how he's writing him. I may be giving Ishida a little bit too much credit at the end of the day because, each to their own really. I don't know how you view it, but for me, Furuta right now to be a good character, a good villain. This backstory that we hopefully get in the upcoming chapter has to be incredible. It has to be filled with emotion, maybe potentially a different side of Furuta. This week's chapter alone was a teaser for it. A side of Furuta that we have not seen, a nature, an emotion. There's a lot there. There's a lot that plagues Furuta's mind, and that is even evident to his full Kagura, seemingly very traitless, but ultimately very obscured and quote-unquote sick. Furuta is evidently a sick character, not because of his ideals or his morality, but because he has been plagued or burdened by something that is completely out of his control, and people can relate with that. People could evidently feel the pain of Furuta's character. Someone that wanted a family, someone that wanted a future, someone that wanted to live, and ultimately all of that stuff that he wants and needs to be brought to a close extremely early in his life because of his bloodline, because of his heritage, because of his family, because of the future that these people forced onto him. It makes him more relatable. It puts a lot more emotion in him. It's something that Furuta maybe wanted to hide away for the entire time of the story. Something that Ishida wanted to hide away for the entire time of the story, because Furuta himself didn't know how to deal with it. Furuta himself, at the end of the day, being this confused, psychological, goofy-ass villain, could actually have a lot of heart to him. A character that has been forcefully brought up and pushed in a direction that he didn't want to go in. A character at a very young age that has been scrutinized, manipulated, and basically coerced into being this character that he specifically didn't want to be. Taking a completely different track to the future that he specifically wanted, to ultimately being forced on a track that his family wanted, that his family constructed, that his family manipulated. Hence the massive grudge he has against the Washu family. When you start connecting the dots with Furuta's motives, even though this whole dragon ordeal is more so probably specific to Rize and the future he wanted with Rize, downfall of the Washu family completely is something personal. The downfall of the Washu family is something that is driven by rage and fear, and if you go back to those childhood days where he's been manipulated, where he's been twisted and tormented into a character that he didn't want to be, a character that he probably wasn't going to be, it all makes sense. Like I said, I may be boosting Ishida's writing up way too much, but I do expect Furuta to be a character of at least this caliber. It may come off fickle for a lot of people, and that's gonna be kind of the deterrent when it comes to the community liking or hating this chapter, but for me right now, before everything's released, before Furuta's character comes to a conclusion, I can only hope for the best. A lot of people are gonna feel conflicted because they don't want to feel emotion for this big bad villain, but if they do feel emotion, but if you do feel emotion for Furuta's character after this video specifically, or maybe even the development that makes his character more relatable, that's a good character. That's a character that Ishida has done well, has done justice, if you will. Furuta may evidently just be on the wrong side of the fence. He was put on the wrong track. He was born into the wrong family. He plagued with a curse of dying extremely young, not having a future that he wanted of his own, and being manipulated and coerced into being something that he didn't want to be potentially. Having Rize taken away from him, maybe the one light of his darkness potentially in his younger days, specifically because of the Washu family. You can imagine the burden, you can imagine the grudge, you could imagine the anger that Furuta has and had for the Washu family, and why he chose the direction for this story, and why he chose to be the author and the villain of Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. So that's basically it. I hope this video gives people the idea of what Furuta's character could potentially be. Like I said, I'm not too sure if Ishida is going to go down this route, but to be completely honest, I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping there is a lot more to Furuta to make him a more relatable character, to make him more emotional. And yes, it may seem very weird for Furuta to get this development as of now, but for Furuta's character to be redeemable to any extent, because at the moment he's not really doing the story or this fight in general all too much justice, because he's falling very flat in the character development department. I'm hoping with the stuff that I've talked about is kind of the backbone to help fill in the blanks for Furuta's character. I feel like it would be very fitting. I feel like it would be nicely done, and if Ishida were to put emphasis on it, put a bit of time into it, it could turn into something pretty nice. It could make people feel sorry for such a crazy, psychotic, goofy villain throughout the entirety of the story, and maybe even switch people's perspectives, because at the end of the day, that's what Tokyo Ghoul Re is. A matter of perspective. Who's right, who's wrong, who's good, who's bad, who has the more evil intentions, who has the better intentions. At the end of the day, everyone in this story is absolutely evil. It's kind of more so who is more evil than the other person at this point, and how far do people's sense of justice and morality extend into their own self-goals goal, their self-motive at the end of the day. Everyone has their own agenda, their own personal agenda, not a group agenda, not a worldly agenda, a personal one. Can only wish for the best at this point for Furuta's character. So with that being said, I'm actually going to end the video here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.